How do you find and experience peace when you feel worried, you feel afraid, you feel you're in your darkest hours? Perhaps there's something that's happening in your body physically or to a loved one, or you're really sick, whether it's physically or mentally, emotionally, and you're wondering, like, could it get better at all? Is there any hope for me? I'm going to share with you a personal story of mine over 20 years ago. I'm going to share this because it's come up a number of times, and it's just a reminder of how we can actually access peace even amidst the most fear in our lives. So I'm just going to share what I did personally. You could take it or leave it. Maybe parts of this will be helpful. It may or may not be for you, but I'm going to share it because I think there's someone that will benefit from this. So I was in my early 20s. I had just returned from my first volunteer trip to Kenya, Africa. And I had done some volunteer work there. And I came back from that trip thinking, this was right as I was finishing college. I was like, man, I feel like I know what I want to do with my life. Like, I was working with children over there, orphan and vulnerable children, and I really wanted to be an advocate and a voice for them. And you know, when you're at a point in your life where you're not sure where you're going in life, and then you have clarity, and it's just an exhilarating feeling. I was just feeling really excited about life, about my future. And a couple weeks later, I was diagnosed with cancer. I was diagnosed specifically with melanoma. Now, that story is interesting, how I even found that out. I had a crack in my toenail. It was not causing any pain or anything like that. I was like, oh, this is interesting. It's weird. I'll go to the dermatologist and get my toenail checked out. And when I was there, it was my first time with the dermatologist, and the dermatologist was like, oh, you have really fair skin. Like, you know, is it okay if we look over your skin and do a skin check and just make sure nothing looks suspicious? Well, there was something that looked suspicious. There was you might be able to see this scar here now, but there was a tiny little mole here on my chest about the size of a pencil eraser. And they asked me if I recall it being lighter in color, and I actually did recall. I was like, yeah, I don't remember it being so dark. And they're like, well, it looks kind of suspicious. Do you mind if we take a biopsy? So I'm like, sure, no problem. So they scrape a little bit off, send it to the labs. And a few days later, I get a call from the doctor, and they're like, we don't know what's wrong with your toenail, but the test came back positive for your skin. And initially I was thinking, oh, you know, this is not the best news, but it's not the worst news. In my mind, I was thinking, well, skin cancer. I was thinking of my grandma, who I look exactly like, and she had numerous bouts of skin cancer, and it was it was not melanoma though. It was the kind of skin cancer where she'd go in and she'd get scraped off and then she'd be fine. So in my mind, I was like, okay, well, this is not tragic news. I could just go in and get it scraped off, right? So the doctor's like, Laurie, you have melanoma. Do you know what melanoma is? And I didn't know at the time what melanoma was. I was just in my early 20s, fresh out of college. And so he was explaining to me that it's the kind that spreads, and it can be very serious, it can be very lethal. And he's like, we don't know what stage it's in. So we're gonna have to go in and, you know, take a much bigger biopsy and see where it's at. So initially, I'm gonna tell you, I was kind of in shock and maybe a little bit of denial. I was like, oh, you know, all the thoughts that go through your mind, if you get some kind of diagnosis, whether it's for you or a loved one, there's a lot of different mixed emotions that go on. For me, I was like, oh, I'm too young to die. You know, like when you think about the worst case scenario, you know, like, oh, this could be something really serious. My mind was like, oh, I'm too young to die. And then it really hit me like, are you kidding, Laurie? Like, young children die every single day. You're not too young to die. And so then the fear started hitting. I started feeling the fear and the worry and the anxiety. This is what I did. I lived in Minnesota at the time. I'm born and raised in Minnesota, and thousands of lakes everywhere. So I lived close to a lake, and I would just walk down to the lake. Nature is my therapy. It's always been my therapy. I walked down to the lake every day, and I would cry and I would pray to God, and I would journal occasionally, like how I'm really thinking and feeling, and I just felt so many different mixed emotions. And I'll tell you, you know the saying, when the student is ready, the teacher comes. Well, there was a book that I came across during that time, and it was talking about being grateful in all things, and even praising God in all things. In other words, not just the good things. You know, when we write our gratitude journal, we're looking around at the things in our life that make us feel good, right? We're grateful for all the things that feel good, but how many people express gratitude for the things that absolutely suck in our life? And I was reading these different stories of these people that experienced transformational peace by practicing this method of like counting everything a blessing. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. There's a part of me that was really magnetized to this, and there's another part of me that was so repulsed, and I was so angry at the even just the audacity of someone to invite me to be grateful and look for the gratitude in having this cancer diagnosis. And yet again, there was something like pulling me in my gut, in my spirit, so I got to the point where I was like, well, what do I have to lose? I'm already super afraid. All of the different things going through my mind, like, am I going to have to go through chemotherapy? Am I going to lose my hair? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? How is my life going to be different? Am I going to die? How is that going to affect my family? Like, oh my God, all these things. The dreams and the desires that I had in my heart. I was like, is it just gonna end here, you know? And I was also like recognizing that I'm just this tiny little speck in the wide, huge universe. Like, the world does not revolve around Laurie and her heart's desires, and yet I'm a part of this huge, amazing universe. And so I began to practice this method of looking at, basically in my time, my quiet time with God, and my prayer time, and my crying time, and my journaling time, I would say, okay, I don't understand why I'm experiencing this. I don't understand why this is happening, but I'm going to trust. And surrender. And I'm telling you, I have never, in all of these last 25 years or so, I have never experienced the peace, the significant amount of peace that I started experiencing in my mind and my body, like crazy amount of peace. I can't even explain to you the peace. It was almost like I was completely untouchable. Like, the worst case scenario in my mind was still just like, well, it is what it is. I had so much peace. There was nothing that was like rocking me in any way. I was so anchored. And so I'm sharing this with you because if you're in a place and you're like grasping for something because you're feeling so much pain, you're feeling so much worry, you're feeling so much anxiety and fear and dread and all of those things, and you're grasping, maybe try this. What do you have to lose? This is actually what set me on my path where I'm at right now. Okay, let me go backwards. Go back to that time in my life. I was experiencing the peace that we cannot even express. We don't even understand it. The mind-body connection, psychoneuroimmunology, is a term I had never heard of. It was never on my radar at that time. I was personally experiencing it. Now that's part of my practice. I help people be set free in their minds and their bodies and their hearts and their spirits. And it all started with that personal experience. And so maybe try that. If you're experiencing something that you don't understand why, try surrendering. See what happens. You might experience profound peace.